Hello lovely people. In this video we will be looking at Down4Sound JP95T 5-channel amplifier. Before we start, I would like to thank Jacob and Jonathan for sending me this amplifier. And just a heads up, I do have an affiliate link that I'm going to leave in the video description. If you want to buy anything from Down4Sound, you can use that link. And at the checkout, use code ROCKAT88 and it's going to help me out quite a lot. So let's get into this. This is more of a typical 5-channel amplifier. Now, the problem in the UK, like where I live, is that if you want a 5-channel amplifier with a bit more powerful low end, your options are very, very limited unless you're prepared to pay quite a lot. Now, just a heads up, this amplifier is not for me, it's for the Honda Jazz project, the blue Honda Jazz. If you've seen on my channel, we will be replacing one of the Hertz amplifiers, the 5-channel, with this one. It is slightly bigger, but like for a 5-channel, it's not that massive. It is, as I mentioned, very typical 5-channel amplifier, where you have, I do believe, 0 gauge power inputs. These are all 5-channel outputs. You have some protect, clip, and all of those other LEDs. And on the other side, we have 6 RCAs and we have some crossover stuff with a little plug for the bass remote. So bass remote is this tiny little thing where it shows you the voltage. You can switch between the temperature and you can attenuate your bass to your liking. Now, this amplifier, and what I'm going to do in this video, we're going to take a look at the SQ performance of this amplifier. That means I'm going to measure the distortion, frequency response, and intermodulation on all that kind of stuff, exactly the same as I did with the EZY PWR 810 that I currently have in my car. Now, just a heads up, this is not an amp dyno video. Yeah, you will see some power figures, how much it does, up till 1% and that kind of stuff. If you want to see a power dyno, like a proper one, go visit Big D channel, Derek Wilson, Wilson Audio Labs. He did dyno this amplifier, and very recently he did dyno my 810 as well. So if you're interested about the 810, how it performs, you can watch that one. I'm gonna leave some links in the video description. But yeah, as always, as typical with Down4Sound, you have this. So this amplifier is slightly different, I would imagine, from a typical 5-channel amplifier. What happens with the normal 5-channel amplifier is that you have one power supply. It is the case with my Alpine X series amplifiers, where you have one power supply feeding the whole amplifier. I'm just going to remove this just to show you a little bit better. So this fan, it's not really like actively cooled amplifier. This is just for the driver card and everything. So this amplifier, as the 810 that I have, it has 2 power supplies. So one power supply is for the subwoofer channel, and the second power supply is to run the other 4 channels. So I do believe that this is going to be the sub channel because it has 3 primary caps, and this is going to be the 4 channel because it has only 2 primary caps. And for these caps, we can see that they are 35 volts over there, and these 2 caps are going to be for the sub channel because they are rated, you can see, 80 volts, and these 2 smaller ones are rated 63 volts. So yeah, 2 different power supplies, and here we can see 4 inductors, 1 2 3 4 4 channels. This inductor is going to be for the subwoofer channel, and we were discussing this with Derek as well offline, where my speculation was that when you're dynoing like these Down4Sound amplifiers with 2 different power supplies, there is no need to load all of the channels at the same time because power supplies are separate. So if you're loading the 4 full range channels, that does not affect the sub channel, and vice versa. If you're loading the sub channel, that does not affect the full range channel. So you can dyno this thing as 2 separate amplifiers, and what I'm going to measure, I'm going to do exactly the same. When I'm going to be measuring the full range channels, I'm not going to load the sub channel because it's pointless. It's 2 different power supplies, and it's a good thing, I think, in case of a failure as well. If you're going to blow your sub channel, your 4-channel amplifier is going to be working perfectly fine, and exactly the same the opposite. Now, I just noticed this. What time to be alive? This needs another T. What? Like, what as a power? That would be kind of a good pun. Quality wise, it looks it looks fine. Like everything is seated, everything is glued in, absolutely nothing is moving like it's supposed to be. Now the power ratings wise, the 4 full range channels, they're rated 120 watts times 4 into 4 ohms, and obviously more into 2 ohms, but that is not interesting. The sub channel is the fun thing because it is stable down to 1 ohm. So down to 1 ohm, it does 900 watts. As I mentioned, Derek did dyno this and it does more, I think like 1100 watts into 1 ohm or something silly. At the moment, when we're going to put this amplifier into the blue Honda, it's going to be loaded down only down to 2 ohms, so it's going to have an easy life, but for future upgradability, it's going to be good knowing that we can have dual 2 ohm sub and load it down to 1 ohm. So yeah, this is a quick overview. Now we're gonna jump into the laptop and I'm gonna show you how this thing measures and how does it compare with the A10 that I have and with the Hertz amplifier that we will be replacing this with. Okay, I have all the measurements and everything. We're gonna start with something different, not with this one, but with something different. So let's start with stuff that I always forget to mention and not mentioning at all. So channel separation, these are the levels of the tone of 1 kilohertz sine tone on the RTA, and the channel separation between them, you can see if you do minus 20 from all of them, 55 to 58. So on the lower side, minus 60 dB is kind of the goal, and below that minus 80 is much better. So 55, 58, it's not that bad, it's not a tragedy, but the channel separation is on the lower side. The second thing I want to touch is the damping factor, because somebody was already asking. So I measure the output impedance for, here you can see channel 1 to 4, 0.0046. So if we're going to take a calculator and we're going to do some basic math, if we're going to take a load of 4 ohms divided by 0.046, we're going to get a damping factor of 87, which is again on the lower side, but for full range channels 1 and 4 for mid-range and suites, it doesn't matter. And from the damping factor tests that I did, anything above 20, above 50 is perfectly fine enough. So this is channel 1 and 4. If we're going to have a look at sub-channel is slightly lower, so 0.041. If we're going to do the same math, but we're going to take a 2 ohm subwoofer, because usually subwoofers are lower impedance, 2 ohm divided by 0.041, we have a damping factor of 50. Again, on the lower side, but for a subwoofer, 50 is perfectly fine. You would have problems with damping factor if it would be 10, 15, 20. 50 is gonna be fine. Low, but still fine. Now let's have a look at THD. This is THD plus noise versus level. We have up to 1% clipping. These are just to show you the channel differences between channel 1 and 4. And we see one channel slightly stands out, which is channel number 4. If we're going to remove that channel number 4, all other 3 are kind of the same. Now, how this compares to the 810 and the Hertz that we have, I'm going to remove channel 2 and 3, just leave 1, which is easier to see. This is the 810, which is almost identical, I want to say. The 810 has more power. This one has a little bit less before clipping, but the THD is the same. The Hertz is very similar. It is slightly cleaner than this one. However, the Hertz that we will be replacing, and for those that don't know, it's HDP5, 5-channel. That one has only, what, 50 watts per channel, so much less power, but the THD plus noise is kind of the same. If we're going to have a look at THD only without the noise, we have a very similar situation where the Hertz that we will be replacing is somewhere there. It has slightly higher THD, so these two, the 810 and the 95T, has slightly lower THD, but we can say it's kind of the same. The only difference between these is the power. If we have a look at the noise, here we see the differences. The Hertz has lower noise compared to these down for sound amplifiers, and yeah, we're going to come back to this noise. So now let's have a look one by one. For this, we're going to take channel number 1 for all the measurements, because all of them are kind of the same. So we see that this has up to 1% clipping. I measured 112 It is rated 120. However, my voltage was dropping to 12.7 instead of 14.4 or whatever Big D was measuring. So my voltage is lower. That's why the output is lower. So yeah, 112. Super clean up to 100 watts. And the cleanliness we can see is something like 0.01 up to 0.015. So THD is very low. It's totally fine. Now let's have a look at THD versus frequency. And here you can see a slightly rise at the lower end and a slight rise at the top end where the THD kind of pokes out, 0.03. So we have a very, very similar situation as we had on the 810. 810 had a slightly higher rise up to 0.1. So there is a THD rise towards the higher frequencies, but it's less than the 810. Now let's compare the 1 kilohertz tone, which is this one. So yeah, it's clean. Like THD wise is very clean. You can see the lowest harmonics, second, third, and fifth. There are minus 100 dB and lower, so very, very low harmonics. I'm just gonna do this. However, we can see that the noise is higher than all the others that we typically like to see. So like my Alpines, it's like minus 30 or something, minus 130. It's much lower. The 810 is extremely similar. We can say that they're identical. The only difference between the 810 and this 95T is the power output, but everything is kind of the same. However, when we compare to the HDP5, the HDP, the hertz that we will be replacing it with, has slightly higher harmonics, but we can see that the noise, it is much lower. And we're going to see the same situation with higher frequency intermodulation. If we would have a look at one by one, this one, so the hertz, see we have signal to noise ratio 81.3 and THD plus noise 0.09, so 0.01 we can say. This, the 95T, has very similar THD plus noise, just because the THD is very low, but the noise is higher as well. So instead of hertz, 81 signal to noise, on this one we have 78. And again, 78 on the 810. So the 810 and this, as I mentioned, they're kind of identical, just a power difference. But hertz has slightly higher signal to noise ratio. If we have a look at intermodulation, yeah, this one is a third harmonic dominated, not the second one. It's still low, so it is fine for the lower frequencies, minus 76. I would like to see it below 80, and especially the third one, but it is what it is. We do see some more noise in the higher frequencies. So if we have a look at this one, which I think this, from now on, is going to be the most important graph. So this is the intermodulation at 18 and 20 kilohertz. And here we see exactly the same situation as we saw with the 810. See, if I flip between these two, they're identical. Now, I mentioned in a few previous ones that these harmonics, I would like them to be minus 80 or lower, which is here, and they are at minus 53. So for the hertz, we see this situation where we have the harmonics much, much lower. So if I'm going to have a look at this, just to show you all of them, there we go. That's the 95T. This is the 810, identical. You can see one between the other, identical. However, the hertz, even if the hertz has a lot of noise, like here at 30 kilohertz, this is power supply, but the 18 and 20 kilohertz harmonics, these on the sides, we can see that the level of those is super low, 80, minus 80 and lower. So I think this is where that hiss is coming from, because I did perform a tweeter test. So while I was measuring, I hooked up a tweeter to the terminals, to the speaker outputs, with no signal, no nothing, and indeed there was a slight hiss, exactly the same as on the 810. And I think this is the cause of it. So from now on, I'm going to correlate this graph, 1820 kilohertz harmonics, with the hiss. And I'm going to say that if the harmonics are 60 dB or higher, there will be an audible hiss. And if they're going to be lower than 80, there will be no audible hiss. I'll still need to confirm this with the different amplifiers that I have. But for now, this is kind of stands true. The multitone distortion, it shows us kind of the same, that we have loads of noise in the higher frequencies. We still have 15 bits of dynamic range, which is good, but yeah, high noise in the higher frequencies. Frequency response. Yeah, it has a little bump, exactly the same as the 810, and that bump is 1 dB up to 20k, but it's not totally flat. And then after like 30 and so, it rolls off. So yeah, exactly the same as the 810. The roll off at the bottom end at 20 hertz, which is here, we have a 4 dB roll off, just because I do believe it has an infrasonic filter that is undefeatable. It goes down just to 20 hertz and you cannot turn it off. So for full range channels, I think it's fine. But yeah, there is a little bit of a roll off and there is a little bit of a bump. Now let's have a look at the sub channels. So the only measurement that I did for the sub channel is at 2 ohms. I didn't bother with 1 or 4 because we will be hooking up to a 2 ohm subwoofer. Now the power rating at 2 ohms is 700 watts, which is this. I get, how much I get? 486, just because again of the voltage drop. My voltage dropped probably below 12 volts at that point, so if you're gonna increase the voltage up to 14.4, yes, it will reach. And again, if you want to see the amp dynos where this was tested properly with a proper power supply, go see Big D. He has a video, I'm gonna leave it in the video description. But I get close to 500 watts at below 12 volts. Clean up to 400, and that clean is below 0.1, which for a subwoofer channel is perfectly fine. With subwoofers, you're not going to hear that distortion at all. Now, yes, it's not Alpine clean, but again, this amplifier is not Alpine prices. This is a 50 hertz tone. We can see THD plus noise 0.1. We do have harmonics at minus 60, which is higher, quite a lot of them. But again, for a subwoofer channel, it's not that big of an issue. If we have a look at THD versus frequency, it's very steady. There is a higher, slightly rising THD towards like 200 hertz, but subwoofers, well, 80 hertz and lower. So this is very linear and very steady, very nice. Even my Alpine, the big 2 kilowatt monoblock, is not that straight. And frequency response, there we go. This is very zoomed in. So we have 1 dB scale. The low pass crossover height goes, I think it's 200, 250 hertz. So yeah, that's normal. And a very slight drop, probably below, I think the subsonic is set at 10 hertz. So we can see that it starts to drop at what, 13, 1 dB, but down to 20 hertz. It's totally flat. Half a dB difference, we can say it's totally flat down to 20, down to 15 hertz. So even for IB sub, this subwoofer channel is going to be perfectly fine. So yeah, that's it. What are my conclusions? What are my final thoughts? The performance-wise, I want to say it's identical to the 810, just with a little bit less power. The 810 has a little bit more power. Some people with higher sensitivity tweeters will have a little bit of a hissing on them, so bear that in mind. We're going to hook this amplifier to the mid-basses, so it's not going to be an issue for us at all. Basically, we will be using this amplifier for rear subwoofer, maybe a front subwoofer or rears, and the mid-bass drivers playing up to 300 hertz. So for us, this hiss is not going to be a problem. But yeah, if you're planning to run this amplifier in SQ type of setup, probably not. Probably you would need another 2 or 4 channel amplifier to deal with this top end for the tweeters to sound much nicer. But yeah, nice form factor, very good price, loads of power if you can supply the correct voltage. And I think the new owner is going to be very happy with this amplifier. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.